Jake Thompson wiped the sweat from his forehead as he guided his horse through the dusty trail leading to the Riverside Ranch. After 3 months on the cattle drive, he was bone-tired and looking forward to a hot meal and a real bed. The ranch owner, Samuel Morrison, had offered him work and a place to stay while he decided on his next move. The ranch house came into view as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the wooden fence posts. It was a modest 2-story building with a wraparound porch, surrounded by several smaller buildings that housed the workers and stored equipment. Smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth and food after his long journey. As Jake dismounted and tied his horse to the hitching post, the front door opened. Samuel Morrison stepped out, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes. Behind him followed a young woman carrying a water pitcher and towels. "Jake, good to see you made it safely," Samuel called out, extending his hand in greeting. "How was the trail?" "Long and dusty, but we got the cattle through without losing too many," Jake replied, shaking the older man's hand firmly. "I appreciate you offering me work, Mr. Morrison. I needed a place to settle down for a while." Samuel smiled and gestured toward the young woman who had been quietly waiting nearby. "Jake, I'd like you to meet Emma Collins. She helps run the household and takes care of things around here. Emma, this is Jake Thompson, the cowboy I told you about." Emma stepped forward slightly, keeping her eyes downcast, as was proper for a young, unmarried woman. She appeared to be in her early 20s, with brown hair pulled back in a simple bun and wearing a plain blue dress covered by a white apron. Her movements were graceful but careful, as if she was always thinking before acting. "Pleased to meet you, Miss Collins," Jake said. Touching the brim of his hat politely, Emma gave a small curtsy and spoke in a soft voice that was barely above a whisper. "Welcome to Riverside Ranch, Mr. Thompson. I hope your stay will be comfortable." Jake noticed that she seemed nervous around him, which wasn't unusual. Many young women in these parts weren't used to meeting strange cowboys, especially ones who had been living rough on the trail for months. He tried to give her a reassuring smile, but she had already turned her attention back to Samuel. "Emma, would you please show Jake to his room and get him whatever he needs?" Samuel asked. "I imagine he'd like to wash up before supper." "Of course." "Mr. Morrison," Emma replied quietly. She turned to Jake and gestured toward the house. "If you'll follow me, please." Jake grabbed his saddlebags and followed Emma into the house. The interior was clean and well kept, with simple but comfortable furniture and the smell of fresh bread coming from the kitchen. Emma led him up a narrow staircase to the second floor, where she stopped at a door near the end of the hallway. "This will be your room," she said, opening the door to reveal a small but tidy space with a bed washstand and chest of drawers. There are clean towels on the washstand, and I'll bring up hot water for washing. Supper will be ready in about an hour. Thank you, Miss Collins." "This looks very comfortable," Jake said. Adding his bags down on the floor, Emma nodded and was about to leave when Jake spoke again. "Miss Collins, I want you to know that you don't need to be nervous around me. I may look rough around the edges, but I'm not going to cause any trouble. Mr. Morrison vouched for me, and I respect that." And for the first time, Emma looked directly at him, and Jake was surprised by the intelligence he saw in her brown eyes. She seemed to be studying him carefully, as if trying to decide what kind of man he really was. "I appreciate that, Mr. Thompson," she said quietly. "It's just that we don't get many visitors here, and I want to make sure everything is done properly." After Emma left to get the hot water, Jake sat on the edge of the bed and looked around his new temporary home. The room was spotless, with fresh sheets on the bed and not a speck of dust anywhere. It was clear that Emma took pride in her work and paid attention to every detail. When Emma returned with a pitcher of hot water, Jake noticed that she moved very quietly, almost like she was trying not to disturb anyone. She set the pitcher on the washstand along with a bar of soap and a clean washcloth. "Will there be anything else you need?" she asked, still speaking in that soft, careful voice. "No, thank you. You've been very kind," Jake replied. Over the next few days, Jake settled into the routine of ranch life. He worked with the other cowboys during the day, mending fences, caring for the horses, and helping with the various tasks that kept the ranch running smoothly. Samuel Morrison turned out to be a fair and decent employer who treated his workers well, but it was Emma who really caught Jake's attention. She seemed to be everywhere at once, quietly taking care of all the household duties without ever making a fuss about it. She prepared meals, cleaned the house, tended a vegetable garden, and even helped with some of the lighter ranch work when needed. What puzzled Jake was how quiet and withdrawn she always seemed to be. During meals, she would serve the food and then sit quietly at the end of the table, barely speaking unless someone asked her a direct question. She never complained about anything, never asked for help, and never seemed to rest. Jake began to wonder what Emma was really like when she thought no one was watching. Was she naturally shy and quiet, or was there more to her than met the eye? He had known plenty of women in his travels, but none quite like Emma Collins. There was something about her that made him curious to know what she was thinking behind those intelligent brown eyes. As the days passed, Jake found himself paying more attention to Emma's habits and routines. He noticed that she was always up before dawn, starting the fire and preparing breakfast. She worked steadily throughout the day without ever seeming tired or frustrated, and she was always polite and helpful to everyone, no matter how demanding they might be. But Jake also noticed small things that made him think there was more depth to Emma than she let on. Sometimes he would catch her looking out the window with a thoughtful expression, as if she was dreaming of something far away. Other times he would hear her humming softly while she worked. Her voice was surprisingly beautiful. Jake began to form a plan to learn more about Emma's true character. He wanted to see what she was really like when she thought no one was paying attention to her actions. Jake's plan began to form during his second week at the ranch. He had been watching Emma carefully, trying to understand the quiet young woman who seemed to move through her daily tasks like a gentle breeze. Every morning she was up before sunrise. Every evening she was the last to finish her work, and in between she maintained the household with an efficiency that impressed even the most experienced ranch hands. But Jake sensed something beneath Emma's quiet exterior. Sometimes when she thought no one was looking, he caught glimpses of a different person entirely. He saw her smile to herself while hanging laundry on the line, watched her pause to pet the barn cats when she thought she was alone, and noticed how she would sometimes stand on the porch in the evening, looking out at the horizon with an expression of longing. The other ranch hands had their own opinions about Emma. Cookie, the old cook who helped her in the kitchen, thought she was too quiet for her own good. That girl needs to speak up more, he would grumble while preparing the noon meal. Always tiptoeing around like she's afraid of her own shadow, but Jake disagreed. Had seen too much of the world to believe that quiet people were necessarily timid people. Some of the strongest individuals he had known were those who kept their thoughts to themselves and observed the world around them carefully before acting. Samuel Morrison clearly valued Emma's contributions to the ranch. During their conversations in the evening, he often mentioned how much easier his life had become since Emma had arrived 6 months earlier. That girl has a gift for organization, he would tell Jake. Never have to worry about anything when Emma's taking care of it. Jake learned that Emma had come to the ranch after her parents died in a fever outbreak in the nearest town. She had no other family and needed work to support herself. Samuel had taken her in partly out of kindness, but it had quickly become clear that she was a valuable addition to the household. She never asks for anything extra, Samuel explained one evening as they sat on the porch after supper. Never complains about the work or the hours. Sometimes I worry that she's too independent for her own good. This conversation gave Jake an idea for his plan. If Emma was as selfless and caring as she appeared to be, how would she react if she thought someone needed her help? Would her true nature come out if she believed she was the only one who could make a difference? Jake decided to test Emma's character by pretending to be sick. It would give him a chance to observe her behavior when she thought he was unaware of her actions. He had noticed that Emma always checked on everyone in the household, making sure they had what they needed and were comfortable. If he appeared to be unwell, she would likely feel responsible for his care. The opportunity came 3 days later when Jake returned from a particularly long day of work. He had been helping to move cattle to a different pasture, and the job had required riding in the hot sun for most of the afternoon. He was genuinely tired, which would make his act more convincing. During supper that evening, Jock made sure to eat less than usual, and to mention that he was feeling a bit under the weather. "Must be all that sun today," he said, rubbing his forehead as if he had a headache. I think I'll turn in early tonight." Emma immediately looked concerned. "Are you feeling feverish, Mr. Thompson? Perhaps you should drink some extra water before you sleep?" Jake assured her that he would be fine, with a good night's rest, but he could see that she was worried. As he headed upstairs to his room, he noticed Emma watching him with the same careful attention she gave to everything that needed tending on the ranch. Once in his room, Jake prepared for his experiment. He changed into his night clothes and lay down on the bed, but instead of actually sleeping, he planned to stay awake and see what Emma would do if she thought he was seriously ill. He didn't have to wait long. About an hour after he had gone upstairs, Jake heard soft footsteps in the hallway. The steps paused outside his door, and he could sense someone listening carefully. Then the footsteps moved away, but Jake suspected this wouldn't be Emma's only visit. Sure enough, around midnight, Jake heard the quiet sound of his door opening. He kept his breathing steady and his eyes closed, pretending to be in a deep sleep. Through his barely opened eyelids, he could see Emma's small form silhouetted in the doorway. Holding a candle, she stood there for several minutes, clearly trying to decide whether to enter the room or leave him alone. Finally, she stepped inside and approached the bed cautiously. Jake could feel her presence nearby, as she seemed to be checking to see if he was breathing normally and didn't appear to be in distress. Satisfied that he was sleeping peacefully, Emma quietly left the room, but Jake could tell from the sounds in the hallway that she hadn't gone back to bed. Instead, it seemed like she had gone downstairs. It's probably to prepare something that might help him feel better in the morning. Jake was touched by Emma's genuine concern, but he was also curious to see how far her caring nature would extend. He decided to continue his act the next morning, appearing to be more unwell than he had been the night before. When Emma came to wake him for breakfast, Jake pretended to be groggy and weak. "I'm sorry, Miss Collins," he said in a hoarse voice. "I don't think I can make it downstairs for breakfast. My head is pounding, and I feel terrible." Emma's reaction was immediate and genuine. Her face filled with worry, and she quickly felt his forehead with the back of her hand to check for fever. "You do feel a bit warm," she said, though Jake knew he wasn't actually running a temperature. "You need to stay in bed and rest. I'll bring you something to eat and some medicine." Jake protested weakly, saying he didn't want to be any trouble, but Emma was already taking charge of the situation. "It's no trouble at all," she said firmly, showing more decisiveness than Jake had ever seen from her before. "The most important thing is getting you well again." After Emma left the room, Jake smiled to himself. His plan was working perfectly. He was beginning to see a different side of Emma Collins, one that was confident and capable when someone needed her help. She had immediately stepped up to take care of him without any thought for the extra work it would mean for her. Throughout the morning, Emma checked on Jake regularly, bringing him water, herbal tea, and light food that would be easy for a sick person to digest. Each time she entered the room, Jake pretended to be either sleeping or too weak to pay much attention to what she was doing. By the afternoon of his second day pretending to be ill, Jake was amazed by what he observed about Emma's true character. The quiet, reserved young woman he had known was replaced by someone who was efficient, decisive, and completely devoted to making sure he recovered quickly. Emma had rearranged her entire daily routine to accommodate his needs. She moved quietly through the house so as not to disturb his rest. But Jake could hear her working even harder than usual to keep up with her regular duties while also caring for him. She prepared special meals that would be easy for a sick person to digest, brewed herbal teas that were supposed to help with headaches, and even gathered wildflowers to put in his room because she thought they might cheer him up. What impressed Jake most was how Emma never complained about the extra work or made him feel like he was being a burden. Every time she entered his room, she had a calm, reassuring presence that would have been genuinely comforting if he had actually been sick. She spoke to him in gentle tones, asking how he was feeling and what she could do to help him feel better. Jake also noticed that Emma had taken it upon herself to research remedies for his supposed illness. She had clearly been asking Cookie and some of the other ranch hands about what treatments might be effective. When she brought him a particularly bitter-tasting tea on the second afternoon, she explained apologetically that it was made from willow bark and might help reduce his fever. I know it doesn't taste very good, she said softly, but Cookie says it's the best thing for bringing down a high temperature. I added a little honey to make it more pleasant. Jake dutifully drank the tea, even though it was quite bitter because he was moved by the obvious care and effort Emma had put into preparing it. He was beginning to feel genuinely guilty about deceiving such a kind and generous person. But he was also fascinated by what he was learning about her character. During his pretended illness, Jake also observed how Emma interacted with the other people on the ranch when she thought he couldn't hear. Through his open window, he could listen to her conversations with Samuel, Morrison, Cookie, and the other workers.
Ow.
What he heard surprised him. When Samuel expressed concern about Jake's condition and suggested calling for the doctor from town, Emma spoke up with more confidence than Jake had ever heard from her before. I don't think that's necessary yet, Mr. Morrison, she said in a clear, steady voice. His fever isn't too high, and he's been able to keep food down. I think with proper rest and care, he should start feeling better in another day or two. Jake was impressed by how knowledgeable Emma sounded about medical matters. It was clear that she had experience caring for sick people, probably from when her parents had been ill before they died. Samuel seemed to trust her judgment completely, which told Jake that the ranch owner had more respect for Emma's abilities than she usually allowed herself to show. Emma also took charge of reassigning some of Jake's work duties to other ranch hands. She spoke with authority about what needed to be done and when, showing an understanding of ranch operations that went far beyond what Jake had expected from someone who was supposed to be just a household helper. Tom, can you handle checking the fence line in the north pasture tomorrow? She asked one of the cowboys. Jake was supposed to do that, but it'll probably be a few more days before he's strong enough for that kind of work. Jake realized that Emma had been paying attention to all the work that went on around the ranch, not just her own household duties. She understood how everything fit together and was capable of organizing things when necessary. It made him wonder what other abilities she kept hidden beneath her quiet exterior. On the second evening of his supposed illness, Jake decided to test Emma's caring nature even further. When she brought him his dinner, he pretended to be feeling worse than before. Ms. Collins, he said weakly, I hate to ask, but could you stay with me for a few minutes? I'm feeling a bit dizzy, and I'm worried I might faint. Emma's response was immediate and without hesitation. Of course, Mr. Thompson. Let me pull this chair closer to your bed. She moved a wooden chair next to where Jake was lying and sat down, her face full of genuine concern. Is there anything specific that's bothering you? She asked. Any particular pain or discomfort? Jake made up some symptoms, describing dizziness and nausea that might indicate a more serious condition. He watched Emma's face as she listened, carefully to everything he said, clearly trying to determine whether his condition was getting worse and what she should do about it. I think I should sit with you for a while to make sure you're stable, Emma said, after considering his symptoms. If you start feeling worse, we might need to send someone for the doctor tonight instead of waiting until morning. For the next 2 hours, Emma sat beside Jake's bed, monitoring his condition and occasionally asking how he was feeling. She brought him water when he claimed to be thirsty, adjusted his pillows when he said he was uncomfortable, even bathed his forehead with a cool cloth when he mentioned feeling feverish. During this time, Jura was able to observe Emma more closely than ever before. He noticed that despite her obvious concern, she remained calm and level-headed. She didn't panic or become overly emotional, but instead focused on doing whatever she could to help him feel better. Jake also noticed how naturally Emma took on the role of caregiver. Her movements were sure and gentle, and she seemed to know, instinctively, what would be most comforting. She had clearly done this kind of caring before. She was very good at it. As the evening wore on, Emma began to talk more freely than Jake had ever heard her do. Perhaps because she thought he was too sick to remember much of what she said, she shared some of her thoughts and feelings about life on the ranch. I really like it here at Riverside Ranch, she said softly, while adjusting the blanket around him. Mr. Morrison has been very kind to me, and I feel like I'm actually useful here. Back in town after my parents died, I felt so lost and unsure about everything. But here I know what needs to be done, and I can see that my work makes a difference. Jake was touched by the sincerity in her voice and the trust she was showing by sharing these personal thoughts with him. He was also impressed by her maturity and her positive attitude despite the difficulties she had faced in her young life. Emma continued talking, perhaps because the quiet room and the late hour made conversation feel natural. "Sometimes I wonder what my life would have been like if my parents hadn't gotten sick," she said thoughtfully. "But then I think that maybe everything happens for a reason. If I hadn't come to the ranch, I never would have learned that I could take care of a whole household, or that I could help people when they needed it." Jake found himself genuinely moved by Emma's words and her outlook on life. Here was a woman who had lost everything and found herself alone in the world. Yet she had managed to build a new life for herself and find meaning in caring for others. As the night grew later, Emma's conversation revealed even more about her character. She talked about her dreams of maybe having a family someday, about her hope that she could continue to help people who needed care, and about her gratitude for the chance to build a new life at the ranch. "I know I'm quiet," she said, almost apologetically, "but I think a lot about things, and I notice what's happening around me. Sometimes I wish I was better at talking to people, but I've always been more comfortable showing how I feel through my actions rather than my words." Jake realized that Emma was describing exactly what he had observed about her character. She was someone who expressed herself through service and caring rather than through conversation. Her true self came out in the way she took care of others and paid attention to what they needed. By the time Emma finally left Jake's room that night, he felt like he had discovered a treasure that had been hidden in plain sight. Emma Collins was not just a quiet household helper. She was a remarkable woman with depth, wisdom, and a capacity for love that took his breath away. On the morning of Jake's third day of pretending to be sick, he woke up to find that Emma had been busy during the night. She had quietly rearranged his entire room to make it more comfortable for someone who was bedridden. The chair was positioned perfectly for a caregiver to sit beside the bed. Extra pillows had been brought from somewhere to prop him up. Fresh flowers had been placed on the windowsill where he could see them easily. What struck Jake most was a small table that Emma had set up next to his bed with everything a sick person might need: a pitcher of fresh water, a glass, various herbal remedies, clean cloths, and even a few books in case he felt well enough to read but wasn't strong enough to get out of bed. When Emma entered his room that morning carrying a breakfast tray, Jake could see that she looked tired. Her usual perfect appearance was slightly disheveled, and there were dark circles under her eyes that suggested she hadn't slept much during the night. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, setting the tray down on the small table she had prepared. "How are you feeling today?" Jake pretended to still be quite weak, but claimed that he was feeling slightly better than the day before. Watched Emma's face light up with relief at this news, and he felt a pang of guilt at the deception he was putting her through. "That's wonderful news," Emma said, and Jake could hear the genuine happiness in her voice. "I was worried that your condition might be getting more serious. I've been checking on you every few hours during the night to make sure your fever wasn't getting worse." This revelation made Jake feel even more guilty. Emma had been sacrificing her own sleep to monitor his condition, losing rest that she needed. To keep up with her demanding daily work schedule, he realized that his little test was causing real hardship for someone who was already working harder than anyone else on the ranch. But Jake's curiosity about Emma's character was stronger than his guilt, so he decided to continue the deception for one more day. He was learning so much about who Emma really was beneath her quiet exterior, and he wanted to see how far her selfless nature would extend throughout that third day. Jake continued to observe Emma's actions while pretending to be too weak to pay much attention. What he saw continued to amaze him. Emma had somehow managed to keep up with all her regular household duties, while also providing round-the-clock care for him. The house was still spotless. Meals were prepared on time for everyone else. And Jake never heard Samuel or any of the ranch hands complain that things weren't being taken care of properly. Emma had also been doing research on Jake's supposed symptoms. She brought him different remedies throughout the day, each one accompanied by an explanation of how it was supposed to help his recovery. "This tea is made from elderberries," she explained while helping him sit up to drink it. "Patterson at the general store told me it's very good for reducing fever and helping people regain their strength." Jake was impressed that Emma had taken the time to consult with other people in town about the best treatments for his condition. She had clearly been working hard to make sure she was doing everything possible to help him recover quickly. But what impressed Jake most was Emma's emotional strength during this crisis. Despite her obvious concern and the extra work she was doing, she never seemed overwhelmed or resentful. She maintained her calm, gentle demeanor, and continued to treat everyone else on the ranch with the same kindness and efficiency she always showed. During the afternoon, Jake overheard a conversation between Emma and Samuel Morrison that revealed even more about her character. Samuel had come to check on Jake's condition and to discuss whether they should send for a doctor. "Emma, I'm concerned that you're wearing yourself out taking care of Jake," Samuel said in a worried voice. "You look exhausted, and I know you've been up most of the night watching over him." Emma's response showed a strength and maturity that impressed Jake deeply. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Morrison, but taking care of people who are sick is something I know how to do. When my parents were ill, I learned that sometimes the most important thing is just being there so the sick person knows they're not alone." "But you're doing the work of 3 people right now," Samuel protested. "Your regular duties plus nursing Jake, plus staying awake at night to monitor his condition. It's too much for one person." "I can handle it," Emma said with quiet confidence. "And I think Jake is starting to improve. If he continues to get better at this rate, he should be back on his feet in another day or 2. Jake was moved by Emma's dedication and by her confidence in her own abilities. He was also struck by how much she seemed to understand about illness and recovery. Her experience caring for her dying parents had clearly taught her valuable skills that she was now using to help him. But Jake was also beginning to feel deeply uncomfortable about his deception. Emma was pushing herself to the point of exhaustion to take care of him, and she was doing it out of genuine kindness and concern. The longer he continued his act, the more he felt like he was taking advantage of her good nature. That evening, Jake decided to test Emma's dedication one more time before ending his charade. When she brought him his dinner, he pretended to be feeling much worse again. "Miss Collins," he said in a weak voice, "I'm afraid I'm feeling terrible again. The dizziness is back, and I'm having trouble staying awake. I'm worried that I might be getting sicker instead of better." Emma immediately went into action, feeling his forehead and checking his pulse. Her face showed genuine alarm when he described his symptoms, and Jake could see that she was trying to decide whether this was a medical emergency that required immediate attention. "I think I should stay with you tonight," Emma said after considering the situation. "If your condition is getting worse, someone needs to be here to monitor you and get help if necessary." Jake protested that he didn't want her to lose another night of sleep because of him, but Emma was firm in her decision. "My sleep isn't important compared to your health," she said with conviction. "I would never forgive myself if something happened to you because I wasn't here to help." Emma spent that entire night sitting in the chair beside Jake's bed, checking on him regularly and making sure he was comfortable. She brought him water when he claimed to be thirsty, adjusted his pillows when he said they were uncomfortable, and even sang softly to him when he pretended to be having trouble falling asleep. As Jake lay there listening to Emma's gentle voice, singing lullabies in the darkness, he was overwhelmed by the depth of her caring and kindness. Here was a young woman who had every reason to be bitter about her circumstances in life, yet she had chosen to dedicate herself to taking care of others. She was giving everything she had to help someone she barely knew, asking nothing in return, except the satisfaction of knowing she had done everything possible to help Jake realize that his test had revealed far more about Emma's character than he had ever expected to discover. She wasn't just kind and hardworking, she was truly exceptional in her selflessness and dedication to others. The quiet exterior he had first encountered hid a person of remarkable strength, wisdom, and compassion. The next morning arrived with a clarity that matched Jake's newfound resolve. It spent the entire night rehearsing what he would say to Emma, how he would explain his deception without destroying the trust she had placed in him. As dawn broke, through the window, Jake knew he couldn't delay any longer. Emma entered his room, carrying a breakfast tray, her movements still showing the careful attention she had maintained throughout his supposed illness. Despite claiming to feel better, she continued treating him with the same devoted care that had characterized the past 4 days. "Good morning," she said softly, setting the tray on the bedside table. I brought you some eggs and toast. You'll need to build your strength back up gradually. Jake watched her efficient movements, noting how she automatically checked his water glass and straightened his blanket. Even now, when he had told her he was recovering, Emma's instinct was to care for him first and think of herself second. Jake said, his voice carrying a seriousness that made her look at him with concern. I need to tell you something important. Please, sit down. She settled into the chair she had occupied for so many hours over the past few days, her face showing immediate worry. Are you feeling worse again? I knew we should be more careful about your recovery. Jake felt his heart constrict at her instant concern for his well-being. What he was about to tell her would hurt her, and that knowledge made his confession even more difficult. Emma, I haven't been sick, Jake said quietly, forcing himself to meet her eyes. I've been pretending. For the past 4 days, I've been lying to you about being ill. The words hung in the air between them like a physical barrier. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning understanding that brought hurt into her eyes. Pretending? She repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. But why would you? Jake felt the weight of his deception crushing down on him as he saw the pain in her expression. I wanted to test your character, he admitted, hating how cruel. The words sounded when spoken aloud. I wanted to see if you were truly as kind and caring as you seemed, or if it was just an act to secure your position here. Emma stood abruptly, turning away from him. Jake could see her shoulders trembling, whether from anger or hurt, he couldn't tell. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the betrayal he had inflicted. For days, Emma said finally, her voice tight with controlled emotion. I sat with you for 4 days and nights. I barely slept. I worried that you might die under my care. She turned back to face him, and Jake saw tears gathering in her eyes. I blamed myself when you seemed to get worse. I prayed that I would be strong enough to help you recover. Jake rose from the bed, desperate to bridge the distance between them.
Emma.
Please listen to me. Yes, I started this as a test, but within hours I realized how wrong I was. You passed any test I could have devised before the first day ended. Everything after that, I continued the deception because... Because what? Emma's voice was sharp now, anger overtaking hurt. Because you enjoyed watching me exhaust myself caring for someone who didn't need my help? Because you found it amusing to see me worry and sacrifice my own well-being for a lie? No, Jake said emphatically, because I was falling in love with you. The confession stopped Emma's angry words mid-sentence. She stared at him, searching his face for any sign of continued deception. Jake continued, knowing this might be his only chance to explain. Emma, in those 4 days, I saw something I'd never seen before. Your kindness wasn't an act or a strategy, was simply who you are. The way you cared for me, the way you put my needs before your own comfort, the way you never complained or sought credit for everything you were doing. I realized I was witnessing the most genuine person I'd ever met. Emma shook her head. Confusion and pain still evident in her expression, but it was all built on a lie, Jake. How can anything real come from something that started with deception? Jake took a careful step toward her. You're right that I lied about being sick, but everything I learned about you was real. Your compassion was real. Your dedication was real. The way you cared for someone you thought was suffering, that was completely real. And what about what I might have learned about you? Emma asked, her voice cracking slightly. I thought I was caring for a man who was vulnerable and needed my help. Instead, I was being manipulated by someone who was testing me like I was applying for a job. The accusation hit Jake like a physical blow because he knew it was accurate. You're absolutely right, he said quietly. I started this for all the wrong reasons. I was cynical and suspicious, and I treated you unfairly. But Emma, what I discovered about myself in those 4 days was just as real as what I discovered about you. Emma wrapped her arms around herself, a protective gesture that made Jake ache to comfort her. What did you discover? She asked, her voice barely audible. I discovered that I'd been searching my whole life for someone like you without even knowing it, Jake said honestly. I discovered that having someone care about my well-being, really care, was the most precious thing I'd ever experienced. I discovered that I wanted to spend the rest of my life making sure you felt as cherished and protected as you made me feel during those 4 days." Emma was quiet for a long moment, processing his words. When she finally spoke, her voice was thoughtful rather than angry. "Jake, I understand that you might have developed feelings for me, but how can I trust those feelings when they're based on a deception? How do I know that anything you're saying now is real?" Jake felt a surge of desperation. He could see Emma pulling away from him emotionally, and he knew he might be losing his only chance to build something real with her. "Because I'm telling you the truth now, even though it hurts both of us," Jake said. "I could have continued pretending to be sick, or I could have just quietly recovered and never told you what really happened. But I couldn't build anything real with you based on a lie." Emma studied his face for a long moment. "I need time to think about this, Jake. I need to understand how I feel about what you've told me. This changes everything I thought I knew about the past 4 days." Jake nodded, though his heart was breaking. "I understand. I know I've hurt you, and I know I need to earn your trust. I just hope you'll give me the chance to prove that my feelings for you are real, even if the circumstances that revealed them were wrong." As Emma walked toward the door, Jake called after her softly. "Emma, thank you for taking such good care of me, even though I didn't deserve it. You showed me what real love looks like." Emma paused at the door without turning around. "That's what makes this so hard, Jake? I did care for you. I do care for you, but now I don't know what to do with those feelings." After she left, Jake sat alone in the room where Emma had devoted for days to his care, knowing that his confession had changed everything between them, and uncertain whether love could truly grow from the seeds of deception. The morning of Jake's 5th day of deception dawned clear and bright, and he knew it would be his last day of pretending to be sick. He had spent the night planning exactly how he would reveal the truth to Emma, and what he would say when he told her about his feelings. The weight of his deception had become unbearable, especially when he saw how exhausted Emma looked after nearly a week of caring for him. When Emma entered his room that morning, Jake could see that she was running on determination alone. Her face was pale, her movements were slower than usual, and there were dark circles under her eyes that spoke of too many nights with too little sleep. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said softly, setting down a breakfast tray and automatically reaching to feel his forehead for fever. "How are you feeling today?" Jake caught her hand gently as she touched his face, and for the first time in 5 days he looked directly into her eyes with his full attention. "Emma," he said quietly, "I need to tell you something important." Something in his tone made Emma pause and really look at him. Jake could see confusion in her brown eyes as she noticed that he seemed much more alert and focused than he had been during his illness. "What is it?" she asked, settling into the chair beside his bed with obvious concern. "Are you feeling worse again?" Jake took a deep breath and prepared to reveal the truth that would change everything between them. "I haven't been sick. I've been pretending to be ill for the past 4 days because I wanted to see what kind of person you really are." Emma stared at him in shock, and Jake could see her trying to process what he had just told her. Her face went through several emotions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning understanding of what his words meant. "You were pretending?" she asked quietly, and Jake could hear the hurt beginning to creep into her voice. "All this time, you weren't actually sick," Jake said, feeling terrible about the pain he could see in her eyes. "I was testing your character because I wanted to know who you really were beneath that quiet exterior. But Emma, what I learned about you was far more than I ever expected to discover." Emma stood up abruptly from her chair, and Jake could see that she was struggling with feelings of betrayal and embarrassment. "So all of my worry, all of the sleepless nights, all of the extra work, it was all for nothing?" "It wasn't for nothing," Jake said urgently, sitting up in bed and reaching for her hand. "Emma, please listen to me. Yes, I was wrong to deceive you, and I'm deeply sorry for that. But what you did these past 4 days showed me exactly who you are, and it's more wonderful than I could have imagined." Emma pulled her hand away from his and took a step back, her face showing a mixture of hurt and anger that Jake had never seen from her before. "You made me believe you were suffering," she said, her voice stronger than Jake had ever heard it. "I stayed awake night after night worrying that you might get worse. I rearranged my entire life to take care of you." "I know," Jake said, getting out of bed and standing to face her properly. And that's exactly what made me realize what an incredible person you are. Emma, you gave everything you had to help someone you thought was in need. You never complained, never asked for thanks, never thought about yourself. You just kept giving and caring because that's who you are. Emma shook her head, and Jake could see tears beginning to form in her eyes. But it was all based on a lie. Everything I did was meaningless because you were never actually sick. No, Emma, that's not true, Jake said passionately. What you did was real. Your kindness was real. Your caring was real. Your sacrifice was real. The fact that I wasn't actually sick doesn't change what those actions revealed about your character. Emma turned away from him and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch yard, where her normal life was waiting for her to return to it. I don't understand why you felt you needed to test me, she said quietly. What gave you the right to deceive me like that? Jake felt his heart breaking at the pain in her voice, but he knew he had to be completely honest with her now. I was curious about you because I was developing feelings for you, he said. I wanted to know if the quiet, reserved woman I met was really who you were, or if there was more to you than what you showed the world. Emma turned back to face him, her eyes wide with surprise at his admission. Feelings for me? Yes, Jake said, taking a step toward her. Emma, over these past weeks I've found myself thinking about you more and more. I've never met anyone like you, someone who is so genuinely kind and caring and strong. I was falling in love with you and I wanted to understand who you really were. Emma stared at him for a long moment, and Jake could see that she was struggling to understand how his deception connected to his feelings for her. So you decided to test me by making me think you were dying? I know it was wrong, Jake said. Should have just talked to you, should have tried to get to know you better. In an honest way. But Emma, what I learned about you during these 4 days convinced me that you're the most remarkable person I've ever known. Emma was quiet for several minutes, and Jake could see that she was thinking carefully about everything he had told her. Finally, she spoke in a voice that was barely above a whisper. Jake, I understand that you wanted to know more about me, but what you did hurt me deeply. I trusted you, and I cared about your well-being. To find out that it was all a test makes me feel foolish and used. Jake's heart sank as he realized that his deception might have cost him any chance of a future with Emma. I'm sorry, he said. I'm truly, deeply sorry for hurting you. That was never my intention. But Emma wasn't finished speaking. However, she continued, and Jake felt a spark of hope. I also understand why you felt you needed to know more about me. I know I'm quiet and that I don't show much of myself to the world. I can see why someone might wonder what I'm really like. Jake waited, hardly daring to breathe, as Emma continued to work through her thoughts. What bothers me most, Emma said slowly, is that you felt you had to trick me to see who I really am. Jake, if you had just asked me to spend time with you, if you had shown interest in getting to know me better, I would have shared myself with you willingly. Would you have? Jake asked, hope beginning to grow in his chest. Emma looked at him, with eyes that were still hurt but also showed a depth of feeling that surprised him. Jake, I've been developing feelings for you too. Every conversation we've had, every time you've been kind to me or shown interest in my thoughts, I've found myself caring about you more. Jake felt his heart leap at her words. Emma, does that mean you might be able to forgive me? Emma considered his question carefully before answering. I think I can forgive you, she said finally, but only if you promise me that there will never be any more deception between us. If we're going to have any kind of future together, it has to be built on complete honesty. Jake stepped closer to Emma and took her hands in his. I promise you, he said solemnly, that I will never deceive you again. Emma Collins, will you? Give me the chance to show you how much I love and respect the remarkable woman I've discovered you to be. Emma looked into Jake's eyes for a long moment, and then a slow smile spread across her face. Yes, she said quietly. Yes, I'll give you that chance. Jake pulled Emma into his arms and held her close, feeling overwhelmed with gratitude and love. His test had nearly cost him the most precious thing he had ever found. But Emma's generous heart had given him a second chance to build something real and lasting with her, as they held each other in the morning. Sunlight streaming through the window, both Jake and Emma knew that their relationship would be stronger because they had seen each other's true character, revealed through this difficult experience.